A Me grows in Brooklyn, 2054 83rd Street, Brooklyn, New York, 1970, 1977. The Green Goblin. Holding my tiny hand, my mother led me up the stairs and opened the door, revealing an endlessly long hallway like the proverbial tunnel of a near death experience. The darkness of the vestibule morphed into a blinding whiteness, the light from the open classroom doors reflecting harshly off a spotless tile floor. At the impossibly distant end of the hallway was our destination, the office of the principal of St. Mary Mother of Jesus Grammar School, Sister Mary Benedict. I was not, in fact, near death, but just as afraid, my knees knocking, my mouth dry as dust, my breath rapid. I must have sensed the enormity of the change I would experience in this building over the next 7 years. The Conley clan made a quantum leap forward economically and socially when my parents made the wise and gutsy decision to become homeowners, purchasing 2054 83rd Street in Brooklyn for $20,000 on January 12, 1970. Located just a mile from the Marlborough projects, but literally on the other side of the tracks, the New York City elevated subway line ran along 86th Street. Our house was a world away from Marlborough's dark hallways and claustrophobic rooms. During the visit to our new home, an attached row house built in 1905 on a long block of similar residences, populated almost exclusively by Italian immigrant families, my brothers and I ran through the empty space, exclaiming with awe at each new discovery. Look, there's an upstairs. Hey, wait, there are stairs going down. There's a whole other floor in the basement. I'm taking this bedroom. We could fit a pool in this backyard. By today's standards, a house of 1,404 square feet with 3 bedrooms and 1 small bath for a family with 5 children, my sister Catherine had joined us earlier that year, would be considered unacceptably tight. But to us, this was unfathomable abundance. The Conleys were moving on up. Mommy, why do I need to change schools? I asked, my voice quavering. I clutched her hand as we approached the stairs to the side entrance of St. Mary's. Until then, I had attended kindergarten and first grade at Most Precious Blood Parish, within walking distance of the projects. All I remember from those hazy earlier years was walking to school with my mother, drawing pictures, and napping. Contributing to the vagueness of these first school memories is certainly my frail health as a young child, a function of chronic tonsillitis. I was absent 31 days, almost 20% of the school year during first grade. My mother stopped and turned to me. I know, Jerry, but I told you, I spoke to the principal and she sounded very nice. Most Precious Blood is just too far away since we've moved. Now we'll be able to walk to school together every morning. Classes were already in session when we walked in. My mother's shoes clicked loudly as we passed the open door of the first classroom on our left. Joseph! Joseph Alberga! You are not paying attention! Stand up and come to the front! Came a piercing, cackling voice from inside. Get up, I said, she screeched even louder. I dared to glance inside. I had never seen a more ancient being in my life. My grandma, Beatrice, was almost 60, but this woman could have been her mother. She was skeletal, taller than me, but barely. She was a severely wrinkled ball of rage, exuding malevolent energy from every pore. Everything except her alarmingly red face was green: her shoes, her prim outfit, the scarf draped around her stringy neck. The victim of her scorn walked to the front of the packed class of 40 students, 5 rows of 8 tiny desks, hands in pockets, head bowed. He was freakishly tall for a 7-year-old. I turned to my mother with frightened eyes, about to say something. She put a finger to her lips. She was looking into the classroom as well, with a trace of concern. Still hand in hand, we finally arrived at a door with a nameplate, Sister Mary Benedict, Principal, and knocked. Sister Benedict appeared, an imposing figure filling the doorway. Her traditional nun's black habit, covering every trace of skin and hair save her hands and her face, an enormous ashen square block of granite. She was at least 6 feet tall and built like a linebacker. She exuded the authority of a CEO, or maybe a prison warden. She was also full of smiles and charm as she focused her attention on my innately shy, authority-respecting mother. "Mrs. Conley, it is so nice to meet you in person. And this must be your little darling. What beautiful blue eyes. We'll have to keep the girls away. I can see now why you were so reluctant to leave him even for a second. But don't worry about a thing. We'll take good care of your little man." Sister Benedict was true to her word, oh my. How she did take care of me. Little did I know that this was the woman who would one day knock my head against the wall, who would grasp my hair and bash my head against my best friend's enormous skull. "Okay, then. If you have no further questions, is Gerard ready to start second grade?" I've always had a good sense of intuition. This has served me well in life, but did nothing to help me now. And what my 7-year-old self intuited on that fateful morning in 1970 was that out of all those open classroom doors, there were 8 grades, and each grade had 3 40-student sections with its own primary teacher. I knew beyond a shadow of a doubt which door I'd be entering. Accompanied by Sister Benedict, my mother and I retraced our steps along the hallway. We stopped at the very last door on the right. Sister Benedict leaned down and addressed me directly. "Gerard, let me take you in to meet Miss McNamara and your new classmates." I looked past her to the wizened green goblin. The huge kid was now sitting on a tiny chair squeezed in a corner behind the teacher's desk, his back to the class. I tightened my grasp on my mother's hand and beseeched her with my eyes. "You'll be fine," she whispered, sounding more uncertain than ever. My mother reluctantly dropped my hand, turned quickly, and headed to the door. She did not look back. I walked through the threshold with Sister Benedict, surrounded by people, yet desperately alone, into my future. Brain. It did not take long before Miss McNamara took particular notice of me. Not in a good way, I feared. "Gerard, could you please come up to my desk?" The class took notice. They exchanged glances and titters. Was Conley in trouble? This would be a welcome development. Nobody likes a teacher's pet. "Class, settle down," she warned. When I arrived at her desk, Miss McNamara spoke so only I could hear in her reedy croak. "Gerard, could you tell your mother to come meet me after school tomorrow? I'd like to speak with her." This was not good. All eyes were on me as I returned to my seat at the back of the class. I was not an outstanding student, not even an excellent one. My average score in second grade was G for good. Given that the next lowest score was P, passing, which was just above U, unsatisfactory, a good score was indeed very average. Out of 21 grades on my report card, 7 subjects over 3 marking periods, I was exclusively a G man, with the exception of one E, excellent, and notably 1P in Christian doctrine, a subject which remained consistently weak throughout my years in Catholic schools. It didn't help that I was still frequently ill, with another 17 days absent in second grade. The next day, I paced outside the school, waiting for my mother to finish her meeting with Miss McNamara. The other students had gone home, leaving me alone on the sidewalk. I searched my mother's face for a hint as she walked down the stairs. Why was she smiling? "You are not in trouble, don't worry," she said. She took my hand and we headed across the street to begin the 15-minute walk back home. "When you use your school books, are you able to read those notes at the bottom of the page? The ones in the tiny letters?" "Yes." "And do you sometimes raise your hand to tell Miss McNamara what they say?" "Yes." She stifled a laugh. "Okay. Jerry, those are what are called teacher's notes, instructions to the teachers about how they need to conduct the lessons." "Am I not supposed to read them?" "It's fine, you can read them. But Miss McNamara asked that maybe you don't point them out in class. It might confuse the other students, and they might think you're showing off." "Why would that be showing off?" I really had no idea. Shortly after moving into our new house, my parents installed a blackboard on the living room wall, a fixture that would outlive them both. As the first day in my new school approached, my older brother Patrick began conducting hours-long reading lessons on that board. He started with the alphabet, then built up to simple words. I caught on quickly, and within a few lessons, he had taught me how to read. I then somehow got the idea in my head that I needed to read the longest and most adult looking books I could find. The first one I can specifically remember reading is the Bible. I read every word from "in the beginning" in Genesis to "may the grace of the Lord Jesus be with all, amen" in Revelations. I also read every page of Mein Kampf by Adolf Hitler. Please don't judge me. I am sure I was just looking for the most impressive tome I could find on the bookshelf in our new home's front vestibule, and my father had scores of books on World War II history. Fortunately, the Bible had more of a long-term impact on me than the Dictator's Manifesto. No doubt it was annoying to have this sickly, skinny, pale Irish kid sticking out like a green thumb in that sea of swarthy Italians, constantly raising his hand to ask stupid, self-aggrandizing questions. My classmates had started calling me Brain, but not in an admiring, endearing way, more like "you are nothing but a gross human organ," one that has somehow won the fawning favor of the most feared teacher in the school. My grammar school career was not off to a terribly auspicious start. Potato pancakes. When I wasn't at school, I could often be found at the home of our new neighbors directly next door. Anna Dunai and her son, Steve, Czechoslovakian immigrants who had fled World War II and the Nazis to make a new life in the United States. Weeks after moving in, I was playing in our front yard after an epic snowstorm. I noticed there was an old woman looking down at me from the window next door. She smiled, and I smiled back. "Our neighbor called me," my mother said that night. "She'd like you to visit one day and asked if that was okay. She said she had never seen a more beautiful little boy." I don't remember saying a word during that first visit. I sat on the couch, hands folded on my lap, staring at a house whose layout was the mirror image of mine, but with a dramatically different ambiance. Its furniture from another age, rich and dark and cozy. There was an enticing aroma in the air. I took a closer look at Miss Dunai. She must have been in her late 60s, and her haggard face reflected the great stresses of what must have been a difficult life. She walked with a cane and a pronounced limp, the result of the deep wound on her shin which would never heal, a side effect of diabetes. She wrapped it every night in tight gauze. which by the next day would show a large, reddish stain. But what stood out was not her age or disability, but rather her utter solidity. It would take a powerful man to budge her. My father discovered this firsthand one day as he struggled to remove a huge overhanging tree branch in our backyard. He was not especially handy and he knew nothing about gardening. When he finally managed to saw the limb off, he saw to his dismay that it had inadvertently fallen into Miss Dunai's yard on the other side of the 6-foot fence. Having witnessed the entire scene from her back window, Miss Dunai came outside, taking one careful, laboring step at a time down the stairs to her garden, and waddled, limped, over to where the limb lay. "I am so sorry," my father called through the wooden slats. "I'll come over to get it." "Don't be silly," she said, and without hesitation, she bent over and picked up the massive limb as if it were a twig and tossed it back high over the fence to where my father stood. He later said it must have weighed more than 100 pounds. The couch where I sat would turn out to be my designated spot for all the visits for years to come. Miss Dunai always sat in her leather armchair, diagonal to me across the living room, and her son Steve held court to my right on his own engulfing armchair. The television set to our left was always on. Steve was at most 50, but he seemed older. The heart problems that would eventually be his downfall had already emerged, leaving him short of breath at the top of any flight of stairs. A lifetime bachelor, he had a gentle demeanor, a pudgy physique, a halo of graying hair, a soft voice, and a fastidiousness useful in his profession as a television repairman at a shop in downtown Brooklyn. Every weekday morning, he would walk to the subway on 86th Street, the same train my father took to work. His haven and hobby was his workshop in the cluttered basement, where he had countless tools and machines and endless projects in perpetual states of semi-completion. The first question Miss Dunai ever asked me, in her strong Eastern European accent, was, "Are you hungry?" The answer was always yes. No disrespect to my wonderful mother, but cooking was not her forte. It was in Miss Dunai's kitchen that I first tasted truly delicious food. She prepared two staples: potato pancakes and flour pancakes, similar to a French crepe. Though both were seemingly simple recipes, they proved impossible to recreate despite numerous attempts over the years. The secret of the potato pancake appeared to be the grating of the peeled, raw russet potatoes. I would always watch as she worked, on edge that this would be the one time when she would cut her hands as she pushed down with great force. She never did. After grating 5 or 6 of them, she would take the watery pulp and squeeze the blob through a fine cloth mesh strainer. I imagined getting that moisture just right was also part of the magic. She added flour and eggs, salt, pepper, and, thankfully for me, no hint of onions. She spread lard on the frying pan until it was bubbling hot, then poured the batter into 3 circles, perhaps 8 inches across and a 1/4 inch thick. It didn't take long before they were golden and crispy. She served them with generous dollops of butter. I don't have the culinary vocabulary to describe how delicious these tasted. Crunchy on the outside, a perfect consistency inside, rich, savory, and filling, drenched in melted butter. She continued to cook as long as I continued to eat, and somehow she never ran out. The flour pancakes were even simpler: flour, eggs, milk, and salt, but just as delicious, again, served with plenty of butter. Sitting at my spot on the couch, a plate of potato pancakes on my lap, the television turned on to whatever show I wanted. I would time my visits around the latest episodes of Ironside, Gunsmoke, and Hawaii Five-0. I was in heaven. I visited several days a week for years. It occurred to me that directly behind me, just a few feet through the thick brick wall which separated the Dunai and Conley households, sat my unfortunate brothers watching television After having dined on our go to dinner of fried spam, instant mashed potatoes, and canned green beans, my brother Frank, the oldest, would often be hogging the television, a highly annoying habit he had crafted into an art form whenever my parents were not in the room. Positioning his chair a foot in front of the television, his outstretched hands resting on the top corners of the set, he managed to entirely block the view and exert dictatorial control over the channel selection. Over time, I stopped worrying whether Miss Dunai would ask my brothers to visit as well. I don't think any one of them ever entered her house. This was my special place. A near death experience. The surgery, which finally rid me of my sickliness, at first almost killed me. I was at a hospital clinic with my parents in a room filled with rows of other children. It was time to remove the tonsils that had kept me ill for so much of my early school years. I was wheeled away and put under. I awoke in the recovery room to the sight of my parents crowding the bed. They smiled and patted my hands and ruffled my hair. I tried to smile back through the grogginess until I saw their relief turn to shock and my father run away screaming. Blood gushed in spurts from my nose all over the sheets. I was choking. They rushed me back to the operating room, put me down again with that awful smelling gas. The next thing I remember, I was in my bed at home, on the second floor in the back, overlooking the back garden and the public school buildings beyond it. My mother told me later that Miss Dunai, trying in vain to sleep in her bedroom directly across the courtyard from mine, cried as she listened through the open window to my nonstop coughing in the days after I returned from the hospital. What stood out the most to me from this experience was not the trauma, but rather its blissful aftermath, during which I was allowed, indeed encouraged, to consume only ice cream as a salve to my throat and a source of crucial calories. Between the ice cream and Miss Dunai's potato pancakes, this pale waif was about to gain some pounds and inches. By the end of the sixth grade, I'd be the second tallest student in the school and the one who was hardly ever homesick. Churchill. My fifth grade home room teacher was Mrs. Elaine Papa. If Sister Benedict was the CEO warden, Miss Papa was the dean of St. Mary, Mother of Jesus. She had the longest tenure and was generally regarded as the best teacher in the school. My academic trajectory had improved marginally. After the third grade, the marking regime at Catholic schools in the city transitioned to the traditional A, B, C, D, and F system. My report card from that year shows that I earned mainly Bs, though I did have a couple of Cs in science and health education. The fifth grade was also the year students began taking standardized intelligence tests, a nationwide exam called the SRA Assessment Survey, comprised of the typical components: reading, language arts, mathematics, social studies, and science. The first year I took this test, my composite national percentile rank was 85%, with all of the component scores in the same range. Solid, but nothing exceptional. I'm sure it pleased my parents. A few months into fifth grade, Mrs. Papa stopped me at the end of class, let the other students file out, and then handed me a book. Winston Churchill, Youth, 1874 to 1900. Gerard, have you ever heard of Winston Churchill? Yes, I think so. I guess. He led Great Britain to victory in the Second World War. This is the story of his childhood. I think you would enjoy it. I did, along with the other Churchill volumes she gifted me in the coming months. Later that year, I was walking home from school with my mother, a tradition which was to come to an end soon with the start of sixth grade, when we were surprised by the appearance of Mrs. Papa, crossing the street from her home and heading in our direction. We knew she lived in the biggest house on 83rd Street, a fenced in, 3-story, detached near mansion with a wraparound porch and lush gardens. But never in our years of passing it did we ever see her come in or out. On this day, she must have been waiting for us. She looked serious. This was not going to be idle chit chat. I was nervous. Mrs. Papa first mentioned the books she had been giving me to read and how much I seemed to enjoy discussing them with her. My mother was aware and thanked her profusely. She hesitated before coming to her main point. Mrs. Conley, you need to know that your son can do anything he wants to in his life. He has the capability, the intelligence, the maturity to achieve anything he sets out to do. A doctor, a lawyer, a professor, a political leader. She was earnest, almost emotional. You have a very special young man. I listened in silence and amazement. Who in the heck was she talking about? My mother walked with her head held particularly high on the way home. Alberga and Francis. I was 13 years old in the 7th grade on a beautiful spring day in 1976. I walked across the street from St. Mary's on my way to the intersection, which would take me to the schoolyard, where we lined up by grade before filing inside. Between the passing cars, I stared at Frances Rizzuto, the most beautiful girl in the school, as she turned the corner. It is difficult to describe her breathtaking beauty, and it would be creepy to even try to do so as a 63-year-old man, but she was truly mesmerizing. So much so that I walked face first into a steel utility pole in full stride. I've always been in a rush, so my pace was pretty damn fast, and the impact was pretty damn hard. I staggered, I checked my face for blood, and of course immediately assured the hysterical students who had been walking in my vicinity that I was fine, projecting a casual, bemused air as if it had actually been my plan all along to collide into a pole. In fact, I felt mainly relief. No one seemed to have noticed the reason for my mishap. My year had been going pretty well until this point. I had just finished the last grading period with straight A's for the first time in my academic career. And this was in an era when grade inflation had not yet been invented. I also received encouraging teachers' comments on the back of my report card. Gerard's marks speak for themselves. He is very level-headed and a great influence on his classmates. And the results of the national standardized tests taken in March showed a marked improvement. 93% overall national percentile rank, with reading and language arts both at 98%. And after years of being a loner, brains, I had finally found a best friend, Joseph Alberga, that exceptionally big kid I had first seen in Miss McNamara's 2nd grade class. He was now at least 6 feet tall and must have weighed 200 pounds. Like me, he lived on 83rd Street, 1 block down from my house on the way to school, so when I stopped walking with my mother, Alberga and I fell into the habit of timing it so that we could go together. He was big and goofy and funny. What a surprise when I first visited his house to have him lead me to a gleaming piano in the formal living room and start playing, sitting with perfect posture and with absolute seriousness of purpose. He had been taking lessons for years and had real talent. It was the first time I had ever heard a note of classical music. The fact that these beautiful sounds were being created by my hulking and otherwise deeply unserious friend was a startling incongruity. We became inseparable to the point that our homeroom teacher, Mrs. Maria Santacroce, came to start calling us the Bobbsey twins, shorthand back then for friends who were very close and always doing things together. One interest we certainly shared was an admiration for Mrs. Santacroce, our homeroom teacher. Not due to her teaching skills, though she was an excellent teacher, not even due to her personality, and she was unquestionably the nicest and coolest and youngest teacher in the school. No, our focus was more around her physical attributes. Mrs. Santa Croce was attractive and well endowed in just the way 13-year-old boys would notice and appreciate. To this day, I know precisely zero about bra sizes, and God forbid I query Google and precipitate countless embarrassing breast references on my Instagram feed, but it is fair to say that however the largest size is defined, Mrs. Santa Croce would fit it snugly. She was as petite as she was wide, and for some reason, I presume now it was inadvertent, but back then we knew it was intentional. It was, in fact, a central tenet in our belief system that this was her explicit desire. She would stand in the doorway of our homeroom between classes, her back to the doorframe, her ample bust protruding as the students filed in and out. Most students had no problem passing without bosom contact, but Alberga and I, we were the first and second biggest boys in the school. Indeed, I seriously doubt Joseph could have passed without making contact, even if he tried to squeeze to one side, which of course he did not, because our explicit goal, the highlight of our entire day and the subject of our deepest discussions, did you touch just one or both, was making bosom contact, which we did without fail. The best day of my life to that point, which almost became the worst, happened in that same classroom near the end of the 7th grade. Occasionally, Mrs. Santa Croce would mix things up, reconfiguring the seating, arranged in 4 sets of 2 closely aligned rows, so that students had different partners for class exercises. I located my spot in the very back of the 3rd set of rows and found myself positioned directly next to Francis Rizzuto. Alberga had already noticed, looking back to give me a little smirk as he squeezed into his seat near the front of the room. Mrs. Santa Croce commenced the lesson. Frances felt very close. I could almost feel the heat of her on my right. As the class progressed, I could have sworn I felt her left leg touch mine. We were wearing the traditional Catholic school uniforms. I had on my navy blue slacks, a short sleeve white shirt, and a little clip on tie. The girls had their white shirts, green vests, and little plaid skirts, which meant that Francis Rizzuto's bare left leg, there could now be zero doubt about it, was rubbing against mine. Was this possible? To say that Francis was out of my league does not do the phrase justice. I was playing t-ball on the bench of the freshman team, while Francis had just hit a grand slam for the Yankees in the 9th inning of Game 7 of the World Series. She shifted even closer. Her desk slid till it could go no further. Her hair, silky brunette flowing down her back, grazed my arm. She angled her head towards me, inches away. I could smell her shampoo, perfume, soap, whatever. The scent was intoxicating. During the ill-fated Apollo 13 mission, Mission Control in Houston kept constant tabs on the crew, including their heart rates. From liftoff, when the gravity forces were literally pulling taut the skin of the astronauts' faces, to the moment when a near-catastrophic mechanical failure violently shook the capsule, their deaths seemingly imminent, their heart rate stayed astonishingly low, barely exceeding 100 beats per minute. Judging by my performance pressed against Francis Rizzuto that day, I was absolutely not cut out to be a NASA astronaut. Have you ever held a bird and felt its heart beating out of its chest at over 200 beats per minute? I was that bird, as Francis's leg rubbed rhythmically up and down, and her hair tickled my arm. My face burned as if I had just spent the entire day at Coney Island Beach without lotion. My breath came in little gasps. "Gerard!" called Mrs. Santa Croce from the front of the room. I had long ago lost track of any sense of what was happening in the lesson. Had Mrs. Santa Croce asked me a question? Was she going to have me come to the blackboard at the front to help explain the answer to whatever question they were discussing, as she often did when she had given up on everyone else in the class? Dear God, if she makes me stand up from my desk, I will have to refuse. There would be no recovering in this lifetime or next from that kind of humiliation. Gerard, are you okay? You look a bit ill. The next time I came to class, Mrs. Santa Croce had moved me to a desk far away from Francis Rizzuto. Bad boy. The graduation ceremony at St. Mary Mother of Jesus School was held in its church on June 19, 1977, with exactly 100 students proceeding up the center aisle towards the altar to their assigned pews up front, accompanied by the organist's rendition of Elgar's Pomp and Circumstance. Family members, including my parents, filled every empty seat surrounding us. During the course of the ceremony, 20 students, precisely 20% of the student body, received academic honors, commemorated by a certificate and a savings bond in the student's name. A winner was announced from each of the 3 homeroom sections in the following categories: general excellence, language arts, social studies, science, mathematics, and Christian living. Finally, there were 2 winners in a category called outstanding personal excellence, which meant they were very nice, but not particularly smart. During the entire ceremony, I never once rose from my seat to claim a prize, while almost everyone else around me seemed to have stood at least once, accompanied by the boisterous cheers of their large Italian families. I had continued to earn almost all A's in the 8th grade, straight A's in the first marking period, and only 1 B to close the year. And my national test scores still continued to place me in the top few percentile nationwide. But somehow I didn't crack the top 20% at St. Mary's Grammar School. My first real experience of failure stung, and I was ashamed to have my parents witness it. But there was no deep mystery as to the cause. The snub was self-inflicted. My 8th grade teacher, Mrs. Jean Marie Koenig, stated it clearly in her comments on my report card accompanying the first marking period. Jerry's written work and class participation are excellent. However, he needs to show an interest in going on further and take initiatives that would display his true capabilities and talents. Likes to fool around and talk at times. In the personal progress section of the report card, she rated me as N, needs improvement, in 3 categories: shows respect, cooperates with others, and shows self-control. To drive home her point, she added an unprecedented plus sign to each N rating, making clear my exceptional degree of negligence. Her final advice to me was written in my 8th grade graduation autograph book, used in those days for classmates and teachers to write short parting messages with their signatures. My autograph book is small, 4 by 6 inches, and has the seal of St. Mary's on its padded blue cover, with a zipper to enclose its multicolored pages. The posts were generally poor rhymes with poor spelling, especially of my name, which my classmates still couldn't get right after all those years. Gerard. Roses are red, violets are blue. God made me, but who the hell made you? Referring to the all-boys Catholic high school where I'd been accepted, Mrs. Koenig's entry was more thoughtful. Dear Jerry, I think Severian will finally be able to meet the challenge of your intellect. That should keep you out of trouble. Be happy, always. Even my classmate, Joanne D'Antonio, who was not only more gorgeous than Frances Rizzuto by the 8th grade, but had won the General Excellence Award and was likely the only student in the school with higher grades than me, delivered a similar message in the postscript to her post, written in her impeccable, lovely, flowing script. Gerard, you've got brains. Use 'em in Severian. Love, Joanne. Not that I took the hint. I'm sure at the time I obsessed over and read way too much into the love part of her message. So, whatever had happened to the teacher's pet? It didn't help to have a best friend as large as Alberga. With 12 feet of height between us, nobody was going to mess with the Bobbsey twins. Unless our facade of omnipotence ran smack into the reality of true power in the form of Principal Benedict, who was only too happy to introduce us to the practice of corporal punishment, usually in the hallway, where she would ambush us in the midst of some chaos we had precipitated. Between classes one afternoon, we were tormenting John Cisternino, who had the reddest hair, palest face, and most effeminate demeanor imaginable. He was also afflicted by allergies, which led to an insistent barrage of snorts, snots, and sniffles. I started calling him Mucus in a high-pitched voice with a pronounced emphasis on the first syllable. I was shouting this across the hall, Mucus! When a large figure appeared behind me, blocking all light, like a bat swooping down from a cave. Principal Benedict. The second I turned, she grasped and twisted a clump of my thick black hair. Alberga's head immediately met mine. I saw stars, not for the first time. It also didn't help when I discovered that my classmates found me funny, even hilarious, for no apparent reason. Their favorite request, I don't remember how this even started, was for me to do a James Bond impression. They would come up to me and beg, "Do your James Bond, please," which amounted to my mimicking, in what must have been an awful British accent, how Sean Connery's character would introduce himself. "My name is Bond, James Bond." It cracked them up every time, especially when we were in the back of the class as the teacher tried to get through her lesson. And it definitely didn't help that Alberga and I were constantly coming up with juvenile plans and pranks, some not very nice, several of which I regret to this day. A typical example occurred during a beautiful spring day, a Wednesday, always a half day at St. Mary's, when we decided to have some fun at the expense of John Cisternino, aka Mucus. And though very bright, he would win one of the top academic awards, John was nonetheless gullible enough to believe that Alberga and I really wanted to play with him after school. "Let's hang out at Alberga's house." We left school together, led John to Alberga's backyard, and immediately tied him to the back fence. I do not take credit for this brilliant plan. I honestly don't remember who hatched it, but it could very well have been my idea. With John firmly secured, we proceeded down the block to my house, whereupon Alberga whipped out a pack of cigarettes he had nicked from his parents and suggested we go upstairs to the bathroom to try one. My mother was in the kitchen reading the New York Post as we crept up the dark staircase. Thinking we were being quiet, but those old wooden stairs were creaky, even without several 100 pounds ascending them. There is no way my mother did not hear us coughing our lungs out. And how many hours did that tiny bathroom reek of smoke, not to mention our clothes? We thought we were being clever as we chewed the gum Alberga said would hide the smell. We hung out a bit longer, trying to recover from the nicotine-induced nausea, until it struck us that it had been several hours since we left Alberga's house. "Do you think he's still there?" I asked. John's existence had slipped our minds. Surely he had found a means of escape, or had been discovered and freed. He could not possibly still be tied to the back fence. But he was there, sprawled on the grass as the sun crept below the tree line. And he was not at all angry, as he had every right to be. He instead acted like he was enjoying this great big joke we had all shared. Without a word between us, I sensed Alberga felt as badly as I did. So we invited John into the house and hung out for a while. Alberga might have even played the piano for him. And whether out of guilt or a newfound respect for John's grit, we asked him to hang out with us again, this time for real. John had gotten used to being teased, but no one messed with him for the rest of the year. The very low point of my downfall, from teacher's pet to the smartest student ever to have received 0 academic awards, came on a day Mrs. Koenig was out sick. Her substitute was Mrs. Papa, my old 5th grade teacher who had so lionized me. In the 3 years since my mother and I had met her outside the house, Mrs. Papa seemed to have aged greatly, almost alarmingly. I was sitting at the very back of the first row, and as was my wont by this point in my development, was engaging in some sort of giggly exchange with the boy next to me. "Gerard! Gerard, please!" Mrs. Papa yelled. A hush overtook the room. All eyes turned towards me. Mrs. Papa was not one to be trifled with. She continued more softly, in a plaintive tone with great emotion. "Gerard, I don't know what has happened to you, but I am sorry to say that you have changed. You have changed, and not for the better." I had no answer for this. Mrs. Papa had finally shut me up. Jerry has left the building. I walked out of the church into the blinding June sunlight, my parents trailing me down the stairs. As would be the case until their dying days, they loved and supported me no matter what I did. If they were disappointed, they didn't show it. But I left that graduation ceremony with a chip on my shoulder. It was unfair. I had been cheated. Didn't they know how smart I was? It never occurred to me that one of the biggest troublemakers in the school didn't deserve to receive a reward of any kind. Nor did it cross my mind that my anger itself was a powerful testament to the self-confidence which had grown up inside me over 7 years within the 4 walls and endless gleaming hallways of St. Mary's. Indeed, I was not defeated, but fiercely determined to do better. Never again would I leave empty-handed. And I never once considered all the adults who had made it their business to help transform a frightened little boy, holding on for dear life to his mother's hand, into an ambitious 14-year-old about to begin his studies at the best high school in Brooklyn. From Mrs. McNamara, who took me under her wing when I was at my most vulnerable, to Mrs. Papa, who saw something in me no one else did, to Mrs. Santacruz, who detected leadership qualities through the giggles, to Mrs. Koenig, who dished out tough love, refusing to let me squander my potential. I was clueless as a 14-year-old, and in fact, it is only now that I have begun to understand how much the adults in my early life, at St. Mary's and beyond, did so much to set me on the right path. During the course of my research for this story, I reread my St. Mary's 8th grade graduation autograph book. I arrived at what I had always thought was the last entry, yet another pearl of timeless wisdom. To Gerald, I hope you find a girl soon. To get it on. From Tommy Thompson, the fighter. I quickly flipped through the rest of the blank, multicolored pages and was about to zipper the book closed. The tattered box in the dusty attic would be its final resting place, when for the first time I saw a solitary entry on a pink page, far in the back, by Miss Anna Dunai, my next-door neighbor. My visits to her and Steve had grown infrequent once I reached my teens, and would cease entirely during the ensuing years at Severian High School and beyond. Since she was illiterate, the message was written verbatim by her son. Almost 50 years later, long after her death, I hear her voice, so clearly I could be sitting on the couch across from her, a steaming plate of potato pancakes on my lap. Dear Jerry, I like very much because you are best friend.